For a national disability advocacy conference, giving pride of place, pole position as it were, on its conference program to a consumer opening address needs no justification. But I still want to take a minute or two to try and tell you why the professional as patient was chosen as this year's theme. Brain Injury Australia fields about 300 inquiries a year. Most of the people with a brain injury who make contact, they became disabled in the prime of their lives, often right at the point of entry into adult life and everything that promised. Their injury represents the singular, radical disjunction, the watershed event of their life, dividing it in two. And when Brain Injury Australia trains people in brain injury, where it invariably asks them to start, is to reach for any and all continuities with their client's past, to try and tap any and all preserved skills, as well as any of the wellsprings of work, pre-injury pastimes and passions, as a means of breaching that watershed. That might be an obvious thing to say and an even more obvious thing to do, except for the fact that I've lost count of the number of times I've been told of therapies and therapists uninterested in excavating who the person in front of them was before their injury. A corollary of which, and it's hard to imagine anything more re-disabling, a corollary of which is being thought nothing else, nothing more than the sum total of your impairments. The 14 years I've been in this role, if I've been convinced of anything, it's that the so-called soft skills, the exercise of empathy, the building of rapport, for example, are rather not only the hard skills, but the foundational ones as well, on which therapeutic relationships are not only built, but depend. For an invisible disability, where rubber meets road in brain injury is cognition and behaviour. For what can't be seen or tested for, it needs to be told. Rapport, that shared consciousness of a harmonious accord between professional and patient, is the royal road to disclosure. And I don't think I've overthought things to then claim that empathy and rapport depend on two other, even more foundational skills. Curiosity. You've got to want to know. And imagination, not of the staring out of the window, daydreaming of a desert island kind, but something much more instrumental. The ability to transplant yourself into something of the life circumstances of the person in front of you, to evoke something of the world from whence they come. I hope that might make sense. And if it didn't, I have three people who can help me make sense. Three who've traded places, who've made that trade and are living it. Please welcome Bruce Powell, Scott Painter, and Nick Johnson. If I can start with you, Bruce, this might be a brutal opening question, but a lot of people with a brain injury dream in often the early stages of recovery of simply being able to pick up the pieces, even pick up where they left off. So at what point in your recovery did you come to terms you wouldn't be able to continue as an anaesthetist?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you ever so much. And it's kind of you to refer to me as being in the prime of my life, because my injury actually only happened about 4 years ago. Look, for me, obviously, my injury is only 4 years old. So I think only very recently have I come to start to accept what has happened. You know, I was, as a doctor, you know, I was a head of department, a head of organ donation. So all my kind of identity was tied to what I did and who I was, and suddenly that had all gone. And I'm very careful now that I only ever speak about my own experience, because I've realized, you know, looking at your audience and the people listening online, that how different the experience of a head injury is for everybody. So I guess I've started to accept it, but I'm definitely not I'm not finished. And what I'd also say about acceptance, of course, accepting something doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean, hey, I'm glad that happened. It just means that you acknowledge it and you take it with you on a new journey.
So Bruce, just tell the audience about what happened to you. So you had a bike accident back in 2018, right?
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, looking at my slightly chubby features, actually I was at that stage riding 400 kilometres a week. I was head of Donate Life, and I came over to Melbourne to ride in a charity race. 7,000 people, and if you know Apollo Bay on the Great Ocean Road, there is a long descent into Apollo Bay, which apparently, by all accounts, has a hairpin about halfway down, which I didn't really know about. And my cycling computer kindly chronicled the fact that I was doing 65 kilometers an hour when I hit a lamppost halfway down. Now, thankfully, I don't remember any of that. And you see me kind of laugh about it because, hey, what are you going to do? Here I am. And in fact, I really don't remember about the next 9 months. And I was very lucky, and I suspect a lot of us in this community, I was very lucky to have an extraordinary wife, partner, carer, who really carried me for a lot of that time. I also had I broke my neck. So I had an unstable C5 and C6 fractures repaired. I cut my jaw in half, all sorts of things. So, as I said, when one of the surgeons once said to me in a clinic, "Do you remember any of this?" And I said, "No, I honestly remember absolutely nothing." And she said to me, "Well, trust me, that's a good thing." So I get you. What you're saying is that you take it with you, but I also take my injury as a point in my life. I don't take it as the defining thing that will define the rest of my life. It's just a thing that has happened to me, and I will take it with me with all those experiences. And as I've said to many people, as an intensivist, you'd think that I would understand the critically ill and understand the kind of injuries that I was used to looking after. And in fact, being on the other side of the bed, as I say, has been a remarkable experience. And I'm glad to share some of those experiences with other people rather than have them ride into a lamppost themselves.
If I could just ask, one, as you know, the sort of the focus of today is the notion of trading places. Do you think you were treated differently, or the expectations of your recovery, rehabilitation and adaptation were different because you were Dr. Powell?
Most certainly, and certainly even my initial assessment, I spent 7 weeks in hospital, not 7 weeks, I beg your pardon, 10 days in intensive care and then 3.5 months in hospital. And the assessment said, well, he seems quite well, and my brain injury was regarded as a mild one. And I think because, I was in an environment that I knew hospitals, I knew how intensive care worked. But in fact, when the assessment started intensely, when I was trying to go back to work, it became clear that actually, although I appeared to be orientated, in fact, it was only because I knew intensive care, I knew hospitals. So, my wife said that she said, well, I remember you woke up and you were looking at your wristband. And she said to me, she said, what are you doing? I said, I think I've worked something very important out. And she said, oh, well, what do you think that is? And she said, you said to me, I think I'm a patient. And she said, no, you've been here for 3 months. And again, it's kind of tragic, really. She would find me looking at people's wounds, and she would say, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just checking his wound. And she'd say, yes, no, I know that, but why? And she said, you would look at me and kind of say, I don't know. And so, you see, my wife is not a medic at all. She knows nothing about medicine. And I think, again, that support side of the time when the carer takes over the care when you leave hospital, again, I've realized that is an incredibly difficult time. And I know that my wife found that tremendously difficult. And as you've hinted, there was a lot of assumption that somehow we kind of knew what it was like. And of course, as an intensivist, when someone leaves your ward, you pat yourself on the back and say, what a great job we did. But actually, that's when the battle starts, not when it finishes. Whereas an intensivist, we did our job and great, we move on because the next one comes along. So certainly who you are made a difference, and I think made it very difficult, particularly for those who I'm very grateful to say have cared for me.
I want to stay on that notion of expectation of recovery and adaptation for a little bit, and with Scott and with Nick, and ask them, was there points of fit and friction between your expectations for your own recovery and what the therapists and clinicians that were dealing with you, what they expected. Can I start with you, perhaps, Scott?
Yeah. So when I was, so the expectations, so I'm different to Bruce. I was in the prime of my life, so my brain injury occurred when I was 17 years old.
And you had a tumour.
Yes.
A tumour and then 3 strokes, is that
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
right.
So I had to learn how to walk, talk, and eat again. And based off like what all the specialists said to me, that it was very rare and the outcome was very limited. And again, being in the prime of your life, that's not exactly what you want to hear. The part of the brain that was affected didn't, like, now I know that there's no cognitive deficits. So it was all like motor controls and stuff like that, autonomic functions. So cognitively, I knew that I could still do things, but physically I could not do it. So then it just plays with your mind, like anxiety and depression, and it was just a big mental battle and stuff like that. But the outcome was, for me, not that good.
And when you were given, as it were, lower expectations of your recovery than you were wanting or expecting, how did you respond to the therapists who maybe tried to, as it were, set you straight? You know what I mean?
You're full of crap. So again, because I just thought, it's like a broken arm or something like that. It's like 12 weeks, I'll be fine. No, brain injury just doesn't work like that. I was in a bed thinking, I'll be sweet as soon. And everything just got delayed. And 12 years later, finally got into uni and had no intention of doing that. But again, I couldn't do anything physically. So getting a trade was just like flying out the door for me. So I could use my brain. So went to uni and then did master's degrees and all that stuff. So
I should say that Scott's an exercise physiologist at Headway ABI on the Gold Coast. So as that notion of going to trading places. Nick, please. Nick, if I can come to you, what were you, and again, a different story, traumatic brain injury in Darwin when you were, I think, in your late teens? What were you told about, what were you told to expect in terms of your recovery? Do you remember?
I have various memories of what I was told and had been told throughout my recovery. So I was in the prime of my life. I had recently, sorry, Bruce. I was 19 and a half. I'd just finished an apprenticeship as a diesel mechanic living up in the Northern Territory. Doing whatever I wanted, working a lot, had the world at my feet. Decided to try and sell my car. My dad was in the army. The family was moving to Brisbane at the end of 2011. But I'll see if I can sell my car. If I do, I'll move with the family. It won't be in too much of a rush to find a job. I was a passenger in the vehicle. The person was test driving it. Do have sporadic memories throughout hospital. I spent 10, 12 days, I think, in a coma in intensive care. Upon waking, I had various memories. I can't piece them together. Ended up spending just over 2 months in hospital in the Royal Darwin Hospital. And throughout, it was sort of, don't have high expectations of yourself. Just take each day as it comes. And it was hard to get my head around at that age. The thing with a brain injury and acquired brain injury is you have your life sort of beforehand to compare to what you're dealing with at that moment. So as Bruce and as Scott was saying, it's really hard to sort of not try and beat yourself up and want to rush in and pick up where you left off, like it is a broken arm or something like that.
I want to actually pick up on, for any of you to answer this question if you like, that whole notion of the too early, too pessimistic prognosis, and this is maybe something that Bruce is particularly familiar with, where someone is told, and I still hear this to this day, I should say I'm never a party to the conversations that may take place in intensive care, so this is all secondhand. I've never been an eyewitness to this, but I still hear regularly about someone being told in the very earliest stage of recovery that you or he or she will never be able to do X or Y. And I'm just wondering about whether any of you got experience of that, and also as a counterpoint to that, one of my minor obsessions, which is the place of realistic hope in the recovery and adaptation from brain injury. Dive in.
Well, I think certainly, part of the charm of my brain injury is a compulsion to speak. So that's my excuse for interrupting everybody. And my wife will say, well, he always did that. So never mind her. Look, and I was head of an intensive care unit, and that conversation, I do remember. And I remember, in fact, before then, we used to talk about quality of life and making judgments around that. No, we don't do that. That is absolutely a thing of the past. And I think certainly the clinical assessment of somebody's brain injury and prognosticating around what will that mean for the future, I think we try not to do. I think the thing is that very often, families quite understandably want to know something of the future, and I've written about what I've come to realize is that we don't like uncertainty. Uncertainty is a very difficult thing to cope with, and I think for all of us with a brain injury, one of the things that we're forced to consider is that nobody knows what's going to happen. And that's a very, very difficult place to be. And I think clinicians they do their best to say, well, you asked me, so this is what I think will happen. But as I said, I think intensivists very rarely see anybody who they used to be in their care. And I've made a point of staying in contact with my unit because I think, and I think, again, others, unless you've seen someone when they were really struggling and now years on, I think it is remarkable. I think keeping that faith and keeping that sense of optimism, I think can be hard, especially for the patients and carers. But as I said, clinicians do their best to answer questions. And sometimes I think it's okay. We should learn to say, do you know what? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And people in this conference are evidence of that. You just never know.
So for Nick and Scott, do you have any sense or reflections, particularly as both of you now actually work with people who are coming to terms with their ABI, and whether you've got an experience of how you balance that, offering hope, realism, how those two, as it were, blend in together?
You can go first, Nick.
All right, thank you. I'm extremely stubborn, and I don't like being told what to do. And if I can't do something, like if told like you shouldn't do something or you can't do something, then by all rights, feel extremely determined to prove people wrong. I'm almost 11 years on from my injury now, so I have had quite a lot of time to reflect and put pieces together, so to speak. In the early days, especially, it was extremely difficult to do that. As I was saying before, you have those expectations of what you were before, and you try and sort of get back to that as quickly as possible. Whereas in reality, you just need to sort of take a little bit of time, figure out what things you need to do in order to get to the point you want to be at. Obviously, some people do have physical limitations that affect their capacity to be able to do that. I suppose it's all about the good old term goal setting. That is a big thing in the health profession, but kind of derailed my sense of where I was going with that story.
Nick, I'm going to interrupt right now. I don't like that phrase, the new normal. I don't like that. People say, oh, you're going to get used to a new normal. Because I like the old normal. And actually, I'm pretty flippin' angry that I don't get to choose the old normal. Because the thing is, they say, oh, that's gone. Yeah, but I like that. I like that. Well, and that's a thing I think that probably people who haven't experienced it, it's not great news that there'll be a new normal because you like the old one. And again, that change is, I think, the most difficult thing. And there is no timetable for that. There is no 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. It's very personal and it comes and goes. And I think that's okay. I think that's okay. Sorry to interrupt. There you go.
That's okay. I wanted to actually ask Scott, because I know that you had to relearn to walk, to talk, to eat again. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether in the earliest days of that, you were told to, again, lower your expectations.
Yeah. So because I was like, I may not look like it now, but I was very, very high care and very difficult. So I was still like on life support and tracheotomy and all that stuff when I was doing my rehab. And peg fed and pseudomonas and collapsed lungs and all that stuff. But also I was told that I will never get my swallow and I'll be able to talk again. And I wish I went before Nick, but I'm kind of that person, exact same as Nick, where if you tell me one thing, I'll prove you wrong. So I was very determined to obviously get it all back, like everyone is. Just when you're in the hospital and that, like the smell of the food that other people are eating and that was just like a big kick up the bum to say, hey, you need to really focus. And everything I did in hospital was it's like running a marathon. After a brain injury, everything's hard. Again, I know, like how Bruce was saying, practitioners are doing what they do, like in hospital. I guess they see it every single day. But for example, like Nick and myself, it's not what a young person wants to hear at that young. It kind of can work the other way as well. It can just become a big barrier.
Wait your turn, Bruce. But did you want to say something?
Come on, Bruce.
No, what I will say is when I see colleagues, fellow patients, I still feel guilty about being able to walk and talk. And there was a time when I wished that I was in a wheelchair, because at least then people could see the injuries that I have, and actually the cognitive ones for those of us with those. I think, each of us. I think that's the thing about these conferences. You listen to people, you see their courage, you hear their story, and you think, I'm part of this community. We're all different in this, but as I said, I'm very moved to even hear other stories, and I think that's what I was struck by. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but honestly, it's a really beautiful thing hearing Nick's idea of hearing patients' experiences, because I think you can say, okay, well, mine wasn't quite like that, but some of that, I really get that, and I think that's okay.
And that's how I got to the point of where I am today as well, Bruce. I ended up having to relocate to Brisbane with my family for obvious reasons. But then I as an outpatient at the Brain Injury Rehabilitation Unit here in Brisbane at the Princess Alexandra Hospital, I was passed on a referral to take part in what they called the STEPS program, which is an acronym for the Skills to Enable People in the Communities, run out of the Acquired Brain Injury Outreach Service. So I took part in that. It is a 6-week program based loosely off of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the model of sort of peer sharing and leadership. So I took part in that as a participant, and my poor mother used to have to drag me along by the scruff of my neck each week. Wasn't a fan. However, it was a year or two after I participated, I wanted to get back into helping other people and sort of sharing the experiences that I had learned. So I did a course with them and became a volunteer peer leader. So I was a person with a lived experience, sort of in the role of leading the 6-week course, and sort of one thing led to another, and ended up foolishly at times it seems getting an occupational therapy degree, purely because of, as you said, looking at other people and sort of wanting to help and not giving them an opinion on how they should be doing things, but more so guidance and sharing my own experiences and saying, it's okay that you can't do that. Perhaps there's another way you'll be able to, like rather than going straight from A to B, going to F to Z and then ending up in the same place.
The last thing I want to do is cut you off, Bruce. So, but I do want to pose a question to Scott and to Nick. Now that you're both, as it were, working with people who've been through what you've been through, how do you work with them in such a way that you, to use my coin, maintain realistic hope of maximum possible recovery, balanced against some kind of progressive acceptance of a reality?
I'll go first. So never, like being a practitioner, never encourage another barrier for a client with a brain injury. So obviously never saying to them I've seen heaps of people like you before. Yes, you may get a little bit better. Yes, you may not. Just everyone gets better. There's a thing called neuroplasticity now. Again, like depends on the part of the brain that's affected, and obviously the severity and how long they're in like a coma for as well. But also the signs of managing like overload. So loved ones just they do to this day they do. They want you back to pre-injury status, so they'll throw you into all this rehab, thinking more the merrier, more the merrier. But again, your brain is kind of like how we said before, is like a broken arm. It needs time to heal, rest. And you do need to stimulate it a little bit, but not too much where you just burn out and end up going backwards. So that little progressive overload is good, but just not too much. Nick?
Yeah.
Johnson.
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, I do agree. I thought you would be a better person to answer that because you spoke of neuroplasticity as well. That is a massive thing these days. But also, it is about balancing expectations, and you can see somebody the potential that they may have, but you don't want to sort of force them into trying to reach it and end up setting them backwards due to just sort of wearing them down and sort of providing a negative effect on even their mental health and the challenges that can have throughout as well.
Maybe, Nick, I can ask that question a different way for you, which is
no,
it's okay. No, you're trained to be an OT, and I think you graduate by the end of this year. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, as someone who again has worked both sides of the bed, both sides of the street, as it were, as someone who's had a brain injury, now training to be an OT, where do you see those things in terms of the way that you're educated as an occupational therapist? That balance between expectation, effort, and coming up against the hard reality of what might be something permanent and profound.
Yeah, doesn't make it too much easier to answer the question. It
is. that's just my verbiage. Sorry.
Yeah. No, well, it is difficult. Obviously, you want the best for everybody. Sometimes that isn't achievable. There are limitations, which are obvious. It's tough to answer.
That's okay. Let me actually.
Bruce has got his hand up.
Bruce has always got it. But let me just start. Let me just pose this to the audience, because what I don't want you to think is this is a spontaneous, vicarious, gratuitous therapist clinician bash that we're engaged in here. But I do want to talk about the sort of the fundamentals of this, which is the way that people with a brain injury are communicated with, what kinds of words are used. And I thought that if I pose the question in a kind of positive way, how would you have liked to have been communicated with? The answer would be pretty much like any other person who might have gone through a similar kind of thing. But I do want you to talk about something of your experience of injury and recovery and adaptation, ways that you would have preferred not to have been communicated with, words that shouldn't have been used with you, and so on and so forth. If I can maybe go around the table, starting with Bruce. Have you got some experience, some anecdote there?
Look, as I said, the first year I really don't remember at all, which is bizarre, given that I was wandering around chatting to everybody. I think probably, and it was completely, as I think a lot of these things are, is not meant as it came out, but the first time I ever met the clinician who was going to look after me in the long term, because I was in Melbourne when the crash happened, so I then came 5 months later back to WA to meet people who'd never seen any of my progress. And I met the consultant in a corridor, and I sort of was determined to, when can I go back to work? Still slightly kind of, as I said, disorientated and disinhibited. And she said, well, to me, she said, I'm not sure that we can ever say whether you can go back to work. And that had me raging, because that was the reason that I was fighting. That was the only goal for me, was get back to what I used to do. You know, I love being a healthcare worker. I'm so jealous. I've spoken at conferences and said, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I was in the audience. And that's still true. So when my doc said to me, first time we ever met, I don't know whether you'll ever make it back, that had me raging. And in fact, her and I we have a great relationship now, and I'm an advocate for the brain injury unit and our brain injury community through her help. But I still don't kind of forget that comment that I'm not sure you'll ever make it back, because as others have said, frankly, that's irrelevant. And if a patient is determined, has set a goal, well, it doesn't matter whether it has nothing to do with whether you get there or not. Like me riding in that cycling race, there are 7,000 riders. Are we honestly saying that 6,999 of them lose because one of them wins? Of course not. It's about taking part and having a go. That's the outcome. What that leads to, like for me, it's opened a whole brand new, amazing life of writing, meeting extraordinary people, being part of a community that I never was before. So I take that as a gift. And yes, of course, there's other stuff that I wish I still had, but hey, we move on. So I think, again, going back to what we said before, clinicians learning that they don't have to give answers, and being uncertain is okay, you know.
So for Nick and Scott, are there things that you've either heard yourself directly or you've heard others being told that you would suggest aren't the way to communicate best practice with people with a brain injury?
All right, I'll go, Nick. It's so hard. So pretty much like not acknowledging the person with the brain injury. Just because they've had the brain injury does not mean that they know nothing, like they're not there. So pretty much what I'm saying is like direct your questions as a practitioner to the client. Get the information back if they can. Don't always look to their family member or their carer or whoever it is by their side, thinking that they're not there, because you will lose all trust, knowledge, and I can tell you now that they will leave your clinic and get in the car and they'll be talking the whole way to their home saying, I do not want to go back and see Scott again or whoever it is. They will go and find a new speech therapist, physio, OT, exercise physiologist. So you want to build that rapport, that knowledge with the client, and just ask them about what did you do before your injury, and also like that's what you want to do. Like you want to get them back to a life again. You don't want to make them like standing's great, but okay, let's get you out of a wheelchair, let's stand you up. So then you won't have to get into a maxi taxi, you can get into a normal taxi and you can go to the beach, you can have ice cream, you can have this, you can have that. Just do those little functional gains based on what they were doing before. So you want to know everything about the client, but direct your questions to the client. If they can answer, great. If they can't, their carer usually or their family member will chip in, but that's my take-home kind of thing. Yeah.
Nick, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with what Scott's just said as well. And just because a person has had a brain injury, it doesn't mean that they're not there cognitively. Perhaps it may seem like they're not, but most of the time they most definitely are. Sort of responding appropriately. Don't sort of give them too much negative feedback, as it can be quite disheartening. I know myself, I've sort of had this, your brain will have fully recovered within 2 years usually of the injury itself. So I was sort of had this date written in or circled on a calendar, and I thought, by this date, that's it. That's all the time I have to improve. That was 9 years ago, and I improve every day in different ways that I wouldn't have even thought. Try not to put timelines on things. Respond appropriately. As Bruce said, if you don't know something, don't give a generic answer. I should have been a little more prepared and had a notebook so I could write my answers down, being a person with a brain injury. So
if I could just add something, what I would say is let's remember that for carers, family and professionals, that they do also have to watch out for us, because we're still patients. And I give the example where I started podcasting, and the first time I podcasted, I'd been allowed to start driving as well. And I was so fatigued, and people go, yeah, fatigue. I don't know. You don't understand for brain fatigue. I was so fatigued that I sat in the car and I didn't know how the car worked. I sat with the key and I couldn't figure out what to do. And thankfully I had my phone and rang my wife to say, can you come and help me? And nobody would have seen that. Nobody would have known that's what was going on. And so as a community, I kind of asked people to say, hey, give people a chance. If they look like they're struggling, check in with them, you know? And I think so. None of us want help. I don't want to wear a T-shirt that says I'm brain injured, but there are times when I've overstepped the mark.
I want to come back to Nick in a moment, but I wanted to ask you, Bruce, based on that is, the tagline, as you know, is the brain injury is the invisible disability. And I'm wondering, I don't know many anaesthetists. I'm just wondering what the response has been from your professional colleagues about the fact that to them, you might look absolutely fine, sound absolutely fine, obviously highly articulate, very intelligent. What kind of support have you had from them in regards to them understanding why you can no longer practice?
Well, you see, I don't really like social groups. And in fact, even this for me, I find quite difficult. And I know, again, being gregarious and kind of outspoken, ironically, is a mask, really. And I really have had very little or no contact with any anaesthetist. So I was never really particularly, I know doctors, I've lived with doctors, I've known doctors all my life, so they're the least interesting people I know. And so in fact, it's been very isolating. And again, you know, the cycling group or the other group that I work with, of course, I agree with my wife that I would never ride again. So I don't really share the medical profession. And in fact, ABC Radio, Jeff Hutchinson and Nadia Mitsopoulos have been really fantastic with me. And they'd spoken to me while I was head of department and Donate Life. And so we've kind of chatted in and checked in through that time. But, you know, largely, I think a lot of people, I found it quite isolating and found it actually that I don't associate with my group anymore because I'm not part of that group anymore. And that's just, again, that saddens me, but that's how it is.
I want to come back to Nick and then to Scott, and then I want to open it up to questions from the audience. But Nick, given the fact you're about to graduate as an occupational therapist later this year, and this might be an impossible question for you to answer, but I'm wondering about how your experience of having been, as it were, on the other side of the bed, how that will make your practice as an occupational therapist, particularly with clients with a brain injury, how it will make that different and, dare I say, better.
Well, yeah, hopefully better. I don't know. I think it most certainly makes me more empathetic towards people that have had an injury, especially brain injuries, because, you know, being on the other side, I completely understand where somebody may be coming from. Term the phrase normal again in inverted commas, but normal people, you know, have their bad days as well. People with brain injuries have bad days, and they can be really bad, and for seemingly no apparent reason. So it is difficult. You just sort of have to be patient and understanding with yourself, with those people with a brain injury. You don't know what's happening behind closed doors either. That's what I anticipate anyway, in being an occupational therapist.
And I'm sure it'll come to pass, mate. Absolutely.
Hopefully. It's taken me a while, a 4-year degree in nearly been 6.5 years. COVID hasn't helped. But
congratulations
anyway.
Still. Yeah.
Thanks.
Scott, if I can ask you the same question, and you've got professional years under your belt, obviously, but when you look at your own practice, particularly working with people with a brain injury, and maybe you're looking across at a colleague who hasn't got lived experience, how do you think your practice is different? And dare I say, once again, how do you think it might be better?
Well, it's hard because I am the senior there, so it's sad. But when other colleagues say, for example, get phone calls or emails and that, the people with the brain injury or their carers, they go, "Oh, is Scott there? Oh, no, he's away. Well, when's he back? I need to talk to him. Can I help you? No, only Scott can." It's frustrating, so I can never leave. Inspiration. So clients that come in, they've got the barrier of, I can't get better again. I'll never be as good as you. Well, then you tell them past medical history. Again, I only tell the ones that need to hear it. So, yeah, life does get better and all that stuff, like what everyone can say. But, yeah, they just think because they've had the brain injury, that's it. Life doesn't get any better. Again, there's that thing called neuroplasticity. So then BDNF is stimulated, as you all know, with exercise and that. and then the ability to relearn new things. So just getting to know the client as well. And again, if they want to focus on like something that they did pre-injury status, if you can delve in, because how Nick said before about clients when they come in, everyone's got their good days and bad days. With brain injury, that's every day. They can miss the medication by an hour, or they can forget to have a shower, or their home nurse didn't come as well. And you're going to, again, think about your treatment plan and think, oh crap, what am I doing wrong? And you've got to review it. But just relax and talk to the client and ask them how their morning's been and what's different, it might have been a family member that passed away or something like that. So it's nothing to do with your treatment plan in the clinic. Just sit down and get to know the client, because how Nick said before, about 80% of what I do is psychologically. About 20% is about getting up and moving in that. But just overcoming the barriers of someone's head is, or with me, my brain injury is what I think has made me equipped to like deal a bit more empathetic and have more understanding of people with brain injuries now.
Now it's your turn, but can you please thank Bruce, Scott and Nick? There's a unique opportunity in this golden hour to ask some questions. So, yes.
I noticed that you mentioned the things that the hospital staff tell the family, the patient and the family. And in my case, while I was in hospital and half my body was paralyzed, I had 8 fractures in my skull, the hospital staff told my mother in the United States that I might be a vegetable for my entire life, that I might never walk again or talk again or do anything intellectual again. And my mother in the United States told all her friends. And so everybody in the world thought I was going to be a basket case. That was a burden.
And it clearly didn't transpire that way either. Yes.
And look at you now proving people wrong.
Why do you have to be all the way at the back? My artificial hip is playing up. I haven't got an artificial hip. That's okay.
Come on, Nick, hurry up, will you?
Hi, I'm the mother of a young woman who is now 34. At the age of 6 months, she was her and I were both involved in a motor vehicle accident, and she had a very severe brain injury, and the prognosis on the night was she won't see sun up, and she's 34 now, so there's plenty of hope. But as I packed her up to take her out of the hospital, I was seen by 3 different doctors who said in turn, you know you're taking your baby home to die. And my response was, if my baby must die, in a mother's arms is probably the best place for that to happen. The next doctor came along and said, look, I'm not sure you understand this, but your daughter will be a vegetable. And my response was, she's coming to live in my cabbage patch. And then I was told by the 3rd doctor, let me think. I was told by the 3rd doctor that, totally forgotten. Anyway, he said, I thought I told you to find this baby a home. And I said, I did, mine. And I was given a very, very negative picture from those specialists. And along the way, over the next couple of months, I was told she would never communicate, she'd never sit up, she'd never stand, she'd never walk, she'd never be able to eat or drink on her own, and all of those things over many, many years with lots and lots of therapy are no longer true. I was very blessed that very early on I had the plasticity of the brain explained to me. It was a new idea at the time, 30 odd years ago, and they said, we don't know. This is like new stuff. We'll find out as we go along. And so I just took that specialist's word for it, that the brain has plasticity and she can learn. She'll just rewire her brain. And obviously it's true.
Thank you.
Hi, my question was for Bruce, and it was about the first meeting yay, that you had with the consultant where, clearly that was possibly the worst thing they could have said, but also a story that we hear all the time. I just wanted to ask you what would have been a couple of better things that she should have said?
Look, let's be gentle here. She said she was trying to say the nicest thing she could. And again, look, as a community and these conferences, you kind of learn that what you think might be a nice thing to say actually isn't. And again, none of us like uncertainty. So what was she going to say? Do you know what I mean? It's not her fault. It was a corridor conversation. I was a fellow senior colleague. I think she had a certain fear that she'd raise expectations. I think trying to be humble enough to say, look, I just don't know. There's not. I don't want blind optimism. I don't want to hear that. Look, you're probably going to be president of the United States, but I kind of knew that it was tricky. And I look back now and think, wow, I can't even believe it. So I think be fair to clinicians. They're trying to say the right thing, and also I'd say to clinicians, say less rather than more. Say less. Just be nice, be empathetic, because the future, as we've just heard so movingly, is unknown, and that's great. That's a good thing. You just have to embrace that uncertainty.
I would say, just following on from that as well, even the conversation that the last lady was told by 3 doctors various things, although essentially with the same sort of meaning or reference towards them. It's more just about not being too negative in your approach or your feedback, I suppose. I understand you as a professional or a specialist, you do want to sort of provide or make people aware of the worst case scenario. However, it just may all be in the delivery as opposed to the outcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the recurrent themes we're hearing, and it's great to have an ex-clinician anaesthetist in our presence, is that neurologists often are our worst enemies, and that was certainly my situation in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. I had a massive motor vehicle accident. I was in a coma for 3 months, and after that, my neurologist really, and he was the senior guy at Epworth, he's since retired, really led my family and my carers and myself down all the wrong garden paths and was very unempathetic. And I think the other word that came across was paternalistic. And I think what I would like to see happen is for the Royal College of Neurology to learn about the lived experiences, number 1. Number 2, to drop the paternalism. I had a lot of paternalism recently from some neurologists at Royal North Shore. And thirdly, to learn empathy and to learn communication skills, which they are really failing in. Funnily enough, I'll have to say on the positive note, paediatricians and general physicians I have found have been excellent, and some neuropsychologists, not all, but some neuropsychologists really help with insight. Because if you can get good insight and good awareness, it helps in your growth and development with acquired brain injury, or it certainly has in I'm a TBI, enormously. But neurologists as a profession, and I saw about 10 of them in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales, and I've spoken to a lot of people in the community, are unfortunately lacking in this respect. And I do hope that their Royal College does actually get some awareness themselves so that they can look after the general community. I don't think I'm just talking for myself. So there's just some reflections.
So we used to always joke that neurologists were the most intelligent of us all. Neurologists are most extraordinarily intelligent because of the complexity to deal with. And I think you're absolutely right that perhaps empathy and that the communication side of their role is not necessarily emphasized in the same way the leadership isn't. So I think you're right. I think the colleges are trying to find that balance, but well, from what I hear, and I think it's absolutely true, that they're certainly not there yet.
Hi, I wanted to thank you first of all for sharing your lived experience. And I guess my question was around the foundational skills that Nick mentioned at the start. I heard those themes of empathy, rapport, and curiosity through your sharing, but I was wondering about the creativity side. Was there any moments throughout your journey where someone was really creative and out of the box, and how that impacted?
Surely.
Well, so I can honestly say, because of the nature of my brain injury, I have a very significant diffuse axonal injury. So I have brain injuries, particularly through the frontal areas of my brain, which, as you've realised, makes me slightly disinhibited. But ironically, it's also released a creative side of me. And in fact, in WA now, we're now working on creativity as a therapy. And that's not new, but it's very difficult for patients to access, art, music, other therapies, because the NDIS and Medicare don't necessarily recognise them. So we're trying to work on having events that demonstrate the value of that, a bit like people who watch Space 22, the thing you can see on ABC, that demonstrates that actually spending time doing something like that, not spending time talking about a brain injury, spending time talking about art or painting or really just socializing in a group. I think there's a huge therapy in that. And obviously, as I said, I think a lot of us would prefer not to talk about the brain injury. Well, let's talk about the music. Let's sing together. Let's spend time together, even the ones who won't shut up, because at some point you learn to control your impulses and actually listen to other people.
Maybe one day. I do apologize. I thought you said Nick R, so I assumed that you were talking about our lovely presenter here. I apologize if that question was aimed at me and I didn't respond. Was it aimed at me or?
Nick Rushworth, I meant Nick mentioned before about the foundational skills, those 4 things. And
it's not a competition, really.
Yeah, no.
So have you got a second question, Claire? Yeah.
Hello, I am a new grad occupational therapist, so this is all quite new to me, and trying to navigate, I guess, the do's and don'ts and stuff like that, working with people with brain injury. I mainly just wanted to ask, from lived experience and also being as you said, on the other side of the bed, what is one thing that you definitely would say, I'm never going to do that, and one thing maybe that you're like, yeah, this is definitely something I'm going to incorporate into my interventions or into my therapy?
Personally, myself, just managing overload, because you're going to have a lot of family and carers that are just going to throw the person with the brain injury into all this therapy because they just want them back to how they were before their injury. So they're going to say, you need OT, you need speech, you need this, you need that, you need to do it all on 3 to 4 visits on the one day. That over not many people in there the whole, even if they're normal, can go through the whole week without, you're dealing with the brain injury as well. So the brain needs time to heal, plus it needs to have a little bit of stimulus, plus it needs, time to get better as well. So what I'm saying is the more input someone has, the more therapies, the quicker they burn out. So you've got to kind of pull back a little bit. So with my clients, they'll come in and they'll have speech, OT, psychology, physio, all that stuff. And they'll come in and they'll see speech. And then they'll come in and see physio. And then they'll come in and see me. And it's kind of just, that's why, again, 80% of what I do is psychology, because they're just so physically fatigued that you can't do anything with them. So making sure that when you do become practitioner later on in life is that find out what therapies that client is actually doing, and then based off, hey, what if I had to do that? How would I feel? And if you put yourself into sorry, Bruce, chirp one in.
I wanted to just say to the young lady, and as I said, I think OTs are extraordinarily valuable to us as a community. What I would say is don't forget as you start your practice, don't forget that you have to retain a part of you for you. I think with the stories and the courage that you see around you, there is a temptation to give everything that you have. And I remind people now that's fantastic, and we're very grateful for that. But you also have to have your own life, and you have to have your own family. And carers, professionals have to look after themselves so that they can look after others. So even though you might feel inspired by this conference and hear people's stories, don't forget that we rely on you to be okay. And so it's okay to go home. It's okay to not spend every hour of every day, because we need you to be rested and happy. And I think for doctors, nurses, OT, physio, all sorts of specialties, there is a risk of that inspiration turning into something that can be quite destructive for the individual.
Nick J, did you have a comment on? Yeah.
No, I think both the other gentlemen have sort of wrapped it up a little bit. I do wholeheartedly agree with what Scott's talking about, just being burnt out. I was sort of working with somebody who's a young guy in the prime of his life. He was actually young, but his family was sort of just multiple therapies each day, each week consecutively. I had to sort of tell them, really rest is also up there with one of the most important things when recovering from a brain injury. So you don't want to overdo it. Even like spread it out, have one therapy a day. Don't try and overload the person either. Keep track of what they're doing, frequency, but yeah.
I think we have time for one, possibly two final questions, starting with.
Hi guys, thanks for sharing your story. I think being a clinician, we all have the intent of helping our patients to recover. And seeing you share your story and the time that you had your injury, it may seem that you've fully recovered, but I wanted to understand long term. So there's a point when you leave the clinic, the clinician assumes you're okay, but from your personal experiences, are there things that you're still currently working on yourselves because of your brain injury that you're still trying to improve?
Yeah, I'm surprised Bruce didn't jump in there, but no, I think sorry, Bruce. I think every day it's all about just learning and adapting and putting things that you have learned into practice, trying new ways. And even a person with a brain injury can utilize those skills, figuring out new senses of mastery.
And I think that because there's a culture of push yourself, there's always we live in a world where you push yourself, you work to your maximum. What I think you learn with a cognitive brain injury, with brain injuries, as we've just heard, is that it's not the same as doing exercise. It's not like the same as doing press-ups. You don't do 10, take a quick rest and do it again. Like, for example, this conference for me, this is my day done. This hour of trying not to say rude things, trying not to interrupt, that is really me done for the day. And people look at me and go, how can that be? But as I said, we live in a world where people go to the max. And what I think with brain injury you learn, and as you said with therapies, is stop before you're exhausted. Give yourself a rest, because being exhausted has a whole new meaning for brain injury people. That's my experience of it. And what I hear from others is that's true. So you're right. Yes, I want to do all these therapies, but can I just do nothing for a bit? Because there's value. Your brain's trying to rewire. Give it a chance, give it a chance. Give yourself time.
Scott, did you have any?
Oh, so yeah, just based off that. So after work every day, so I get up at 3 o'clock every morning, go for a run. So I do 10Ks, then go to work all day, and then finish at 4:30, and then go to the gym. But that's mainly just for me to maintain my physical fitness to do what I do in the clinic. So I tend to work with the real high care clients, the ones that can't do anything for themselves. So there's a lot of heavy lifting, moving. I do have hoists and that, but tend to not use them all the time. But just to maintain my fitness and that. But considering that the strokes and that, like the brain injury affected my left side, I was fully paralysed. So I've noticed, like if I'm in the gym, my left arm gets fatigued a lot quicker than my right. So just knowing when to stop and that. But just otherwise an injury's going to occur, and that's going to delay my ability to work and all that stuff. But just maintain my fitness. So I don't really have to worry about doing exercise for memory or anything like that. It's just for my own benefit.
Can you please thank Scott, Bruce, and Nick? Morning tea starts now. So if I can encourage you again to use part of your